So one thing we can do is copy this if and paste it inside of the curly brackets and change every x to a y. If you do just this, you risk making a huge mistake. We are lucky today that both our player and our enemy are rectangles, so their x and y sizes are the same. But if, for example, the player wasn't a square but a rectangle, then on the one place we had to write its x size, and in the other if it's y size. So you should be really careful when making such a copies. And let's see whether this will solve all our problems. And yeah, we are not able to check for a collision even with y. We are not even able to play our game anymore. We have a mistake now on line 29, and again you probably understand that it's a problem with the curly brackets. Now we missed one bracket. This is the place for a closing bracket for our new if. Let's see our game working now. Well, this looks fine, and now I don't see any messages for a collision with the enemy because it is outside of the playing field. Let's try to hit him this time. Well, did you see this? For a few frames there was actually a notice that I am hitting the enemy. This is a really important piece of code, so I want to test it more carefully, and I'm going to stop the movement of the enemy for a while. I can delete this line, or I can just put it in a comment and the computer will not look at this line. Let's see what is going on now. You can see that the enemy is stopped, and I can move to the right of him, and when I'm not colliding with it, I don't see any message that I am, but when I start colliding, I see very good message, and everything looks fine on the right side. Let's see when I'm under the enemy. If you want to continue this test, you will have to move the initial position of the enemy to be a little down, so you can check whether or not everything is fine even when the player is over the enemy. I will not do this now. You can try it yourself so that you can be sure that everything with our check is working fine. I want to ask you some now about something else to do. Are we able, with our current knowledge, to easily make one place in our code where we can write code that will be executed when we are not colliding with the enemy? We did similar thing in the previous games, and we had to make else for one of the ifs, and this else was executing only when this if was false. But if this if is true and the second if is false, then we will need a second else and the code that we want to execute when we missed the enemy. For example, code that gives points to the player, or simply prints you missed the enemy, or something totally different for a different game. Well, it's going to be really difficult for us to make a code that executes when we missed the enemy. You remember that all the solutions that I showed you while we didn't know about ampersands was ugly solutions. And I will give you a better solution by teaching you one more sign that I want you to know. I left space here for the last sign that I want you to know. It's a sign that will let us know one new thing, and we will know it only by the two booleans that we understand from the window. So I will be able to again write a sentence like this. But the new sign that I want to teach you is kind of special in some way, because it doesn't need two booleans to give a result. It's a special sign that needs only one boolean and can tell us, is it dry? Can you think for a second, and perhaps you can guess when it's dry and when it's wet? Well, it's dry outside when, if I'm not going to write both does it rain, is it sunny, because it's dry only depending on does it rain. And what value needs does it rain in order for the ground to be dry? Well, if does it rain is false, then it's dry. If does it rain is true, then is it dry is false. So is there a short English word for such a sign, for such a evaluation? The word is not, and I can write it here in order to be pretty close to programming, or I can write it here in order to be more grammatically correct. I prefer to be closer to programming, so I will write, if not does it rain, then it's dry. So this is the last sentence that I want to teach you today. This is the last Boolean sign that I want you to write on your sheet of paper. And actually, what to write? What is the way to write this in our code? When we we need to press Shift and 1 and an exclamation mark appears. We should put exclamation marks before the condition that we want to check if it's false. So if I want to understand do we miss the enemy, for example, to write congrats, you are alive. Well, I will need to write exclamation mark and then really scary and big thing to check. Wait a second, we couldn't manage to write a single big scary thing. We left it in two ifs. Actually, we don't need those two ifs. Those two ifs can also be combined in one bigger if, and I can do this even for the check whether we have a collision, and I can do it also for the check if we don't have a collision. So this really scary thing in the central brackets after the exclamation mark, we'll check if there is a collision, but the exclamation mark will take exactly the opposite, and I can test how everything is working now. you expect this from me, right? I'm really horrible today and I make the same mistake each time. Look at my code and tell me what's wrong with the brackets. What should I change? Well, yes, this if was two ifs and I deleted one of them. And now there is extra closing curly bracket. I can save my code and see how it is working now, and I can see that I'm alive for now, and now I'm colliding. So when you want to check the opposite, you might use exclamation mark. Of course, I didn't need all of this. I could have simply written else here. But I want you to know and understand both things. I want you to write in your sheet of paper exclamation mark. I want you to try our collision checking. And I want you to use it in previous games. Your task now is open Jetpack Joyride and enter our collision check in Jetpack Joyride. Your second task is back to our current avoider. I want you to write much more interesting code here. I don't want the player to have to see this ugly console. We can make something totally different when the player collides with the enemy. For example, we can stop the game or reduce the lives. Please change this code so that something interesting happens when we collide with the enemy. And, of course, in order for the game to be fun, we need a moving enemy that resurrects when gets hit by the player or when the enemy is out of the playing field. Pretty soon you will be able to finish this game, and I think it will be really interesting. Let's go.